Hello everyone, welcome back to Instant Release. Today we're going to talk about a camera that's a little bit different from what I usually do on this channel. So what I generally do is I talk about cameras that I think are good value cameras, of cameras like the D700 right there, that I think are, face detection not working. Good. So, cameras like this one, yeah, okay, the camera is a face now. I'm still figuring out the XH1, don't mind me. But yeah, so I'm talking about cameras like this where I think that for the money they are awesome. This is definitely not the case of the camera we are talking about today, which is the Nikon D2H. I talked about that one in a video not super long ago. I think it was about a month ago. At the time of recording this, I'm not sure where the edited version will be on the YouTube channel, but anyway. The D2H is a very old and very weird camera for sure, so I think the usual review process is going to be altered in a way that I'm not going to go into, is this camera a good value to be bought, even though I'm obviously going to answer to that question. But I'm going to go through the very different expectations we have for cameras and what kind of expectation different set of users will be putting into the cameras they're buying. So I'm going to separate this review into two different parts, and the first part is going to be the guy that wants the best out of his money or her money, and the thing is that you want to have a good value, right? That's the main thing, I think, with camera purchases. And in the case of that person, is a D2H a good investment? Spoiler alert, not going to go well for that old camera. And then I'm going to take the perspective of someone that is a Digicam shooter and just like crappy old cameras, and what are the things that would make the D2H stand out as, a camera. So, let's start with the specs, because, without the specs we can't really draw comparisons, we can't really, say if that camera is good or not, so let's talk about them and then we'll hop onto the review part. So, this camera has a 4 megapixel APS-C size sensor. It's not really indicated by anything on here, but anyway, it's a 4 megapixel sensor. It shoots up to 8 frames per second with an autofocus that has 11 points. Not a lot of points, decent number of frames per second though. The ISO range goes from 200 to 1600. You can extend it to 6400, but I don't really recommend it. We're going to talk about that. It has Nikon F-mount, obviously, and all the things that you are expected to see on a high-end Nikon F-mount camera body, so the AI ring around the lens mount, the autofocus motor inside, proper aperture control, all of those things are present. It has, obviously, since it's a flagship camera, it has an integrated battery grip with a very big battery, as you can see, and it has no live view support, because it's from 2003, from July 2003 to be precise. So, let's take the perspective of the regular user and see how this camera stacks up. So, too many times the word "so" in here. Well, generally I talk about the price last, because I think it goes into the value proposition and we need to know what the camera is capable of, but I think that for this one, the price is actually important to talk about first. So I paid for that camera, I paid about 100 euros, and it came with a battery, which is this thing. It is ENEL4, and it was almost dead. It holds charge for about 200-300 pictures, and it's supposed to hold charge for 2500 to 3000, so it was not really in a good condition. And the camera itself told me that it was due for replacement. So I did. I paid $30 for this Persona replacement, and this battery cost me about $30 on Amazon, so about 130 euros for that camera, give or take. 130 euros. I mean, we are talking about the camera here, and not any camera. We are talking about a flagship camera, like a big camera that used to cost 5,000 euros. Okay, so if it is that cheap, it's not. It has nothing to do with the age of the camera. Generally, it has to do with the big compromise that you have to make, and here the compromise, I think, is the image quality. So you would think that the compromise that you're making is the resolution, because you just, I just read the specs out loud and I said 4 megapixels, but actually no, the 4 megapixel images are actually pretty detailed. I didn't really find that I lacked that much resolution, and for most applications, 4 megapixels is actually enough. If you are posting online, no problem. If you are doing, like, I don't know, family pics or stuff like that, no problem at all. Where you're going to struggle with those 4 megapixels is when you want to crop a lot, so maybe street photography, wildlife photography. This is areas where you're going to struggle with our camera. Also, if you want to do things like landscape, where you're not going to crop a lot, but you need a lot of resolution, where I would say that 12 megapixels and up are good enough. Well, 4 megapixels are going to show here, and this is the biggest problem I have with the D2H when it comes to the resolution, is that I mostly do landscapes and nature photography and stuff like that, and for those applications, the D2H is not the best camera for it. I never intended it to be the best, but it's quite limiting still to have that 4 megapixel limitation, if that makes sense. But no, for like 80% of the things that you would use D2H for, the resolution is not the primary factor of the image quality compromise. The biggest thing, and I have my notes here because I'm going to forget some things. The biggest thing is the noise and the dynamic range. So when it comes to noise, it has very high noise levels, and I think this is something that Digicam shooters are, used to when it comes to old cameras, especially like old CCD sensors and stuff like that. But this is really high noise level. I wasn't expecting a 4 megapixel APS-C, so it's like a fairly large sensor. It's like 1/2 of an inch or something like that. It's not like a small sensor. It's a pretty big sensor as far as sensors are concerned, and especially for 2003, that's pretty sizable one. And I was thinking that even like 4 megapixels APS-C, that would be like fairly large pixels, so fairly good dynamic range. No, I was wrong. The noise levels are pretty high, the dynamic range is super low. So what does that mean in practice? Well, if we put numbers onto that, especially on the noise aspect of things, if we look at the ISO, if you remember correctly, the ISO is from 200 base ISO to 1600. Well, I would say the last clean ISO is about 400. You could use 800, like, it's definitely noisy, but it's usable. I could potentially use 1600 ISO. You don't have too much color noise, but you have a lot of noise in those images. I could use it. I would also say that it's worth using in case of emergency and not by choice, clearly. And about the extended ISO range, like the 3200 mode and the 6400 mode, which are called a high 1 and high 2 on the camera, I think that these modes should be avoided completely, because even though in the ISO 3200 mode you can fairly see what's going on the picture, it's not really usable, and on the 6400 ISO one, you straight up like more noise than image at that point. So I would just stay away from those. If you have to put a cap to your ISO range, I would say 800 is a safe bet. 1600 if you really need to, but try to avoid it as well. So that's already not really going strong right there. Like 800 top ISO, that's not that great. Interestingly, the D2X, which was released 2 years later, that has a 12 megapixels CMOS sensor, has even more noise levels, and it's even worse than that because the noise level of the D2X are about equivalent with an ISO range that is shifted. So it's not 200 to 1600, it's 100 to 800. So you have about a one-stop difference, and it's about the same nose levels. So it's a bit of a problem here. But this goes in conjunction in the D2H I'm talking about. This goes in conjunction with the dynamic range, the lack of it. And what that means is that your shadows are not really recoverable that much because, well, you have very high noise levels, so the moment you're going to start to bring those up, noise is going to show up, even the ISO 200, so that's going to be a little bit of a problem. And on top of that, you can't really overexpose because you don't have any highlight recovery ability at all because they clip very easily. So what you end up doing is like you try to protect your highlights, but then your shadows are fucked. Sorry for the word. And if you want to do it the other way around, like overexposing to protect your shadows, well, you ended up clipping half of the image. If there's sky in the picture, forget about it. So this is where this button, the bracketing button, and it ends up being super useful because you really need it. If you want to do a bit of landscape, which I'm doing with this, bracketing is your only friend with that camera. It's and not like bracketing with like third of a stop increments, because if you go like 2/3 of a stop, 1 stop increments, that's not going to give you to do you any favors. So what are the use cases in which the D2H is okay for? Considering the compromise that we already talked about, I would say that for photojournalism, if you expose your image correctly, you still have enough dynamic range to do what you want to do, except if it's in low light. In this case, like, it's not going to be the best camera for you. Online posting, 4 megapixels is still twice as much resolution that what Instagram is able to display, so you're golden there if you just want to do artsy, special looking images, but that we're going to talk about that in the Digicam part. And that's about it. Oh yeah, casual sports, because there is one thing up the sleeve of the D2H, in my notes, of course, and that's the autofocus. Autofocus and the shooting speed. So, when we are talking about all the rest besides image quality about the D2H, I think that it's either good or above average. Like, there is no bad part. I would normally complain about the placement of the ISO button and the quality and stuff like that here. I don't know if that's focused correctly, but you see it's at the bottom of the camera here, and those buttons, I complained a fair bit about the D700, like those exact buttons being on the top here, and especially the ISO button not being like next to the shutter button. Well, in the D2H, well, I'm barely changing my ISO, like moving from 200 to 800. That does not give me that much of breathing room, so I'm not really leaving my ISO range. I'm generally just sit at 400 or 200 and never move from there. The quality, well, I have so low amount of dynamic range that I'm not moving from RAW. If you want to shoot, if you want to shoot JPEG with this, you're gonna have problems. So if there was one thing I would advise you, it's just only shoot RAW with that camera. You need all the dynamic range that you can get. And the last thing is the white balance. The white balance is actually fairly accurate from on this camera. You have that white dot on top here is the white balance sensor. They put an external white balance sensor. And the white balance I'm never changing from auto because, believe it or not, this camera has very good white balance, like auto white balance detection. They put an external white balance sensor here, like that's a white dot on top of here, if you wondered. I don't know why they put it, because they already had like pretty okay white balance sensitivity in their previous cameras and they never used it anymore again. But that means that the D2H has a pretty nice automatic white balance features, so I never change it either. So yeah, those buttons, I barely touch them, and I think that the bracketing and the flash settings on top, in the place of where, you know, the quality white balance and ISO would be on a camera like a D700, they make a little bit more sense here, and they're in the right place actually. So yeah, on the ergonomics, I talked about this in the gear acquisition syndrome video I made about a month ago, I said. And I said it was basically the 700 but less compact because the camera is larger. And yeah, after using that camera for a bit more since that video, well, this is 100% my sentiment about it. I have no real complaint about any of the ergonomics on the D2H. Maybe the D-pad is a little bit mushy, but that's fairly like a small problem. Well, yeah, the biggest feature, the biggest strong point of the D2H really is the autofocus capabilities and the fast shooting capabilities. So, by today's standards, those are quite laughable, I'm gonna give you that. If you look about it, the D2H has an 11 points autofocus system with no tracking ability. You have zone focusing, and that's about all that is usable on that camera. I'm generally in second point focus though, because zone is sometimes a bit unreliable. So the autofocus itself, like how well it's able to detect where it needs to focus, actually it's quite accurate and snappy. I wasn't expecting this from a 20-year-old camera actually. And yeah, it's very usable from day to day. I think I don't have any want from that camera when it comes to autofocus. It never like disappointed me in any way. And the only thing I'm going to say though about the autofocus system itself is that it's very not foolproof. If you are not able to track your subject correctly, if you are doing like wildlife and stuff like this, um, you're going to struggle a little bit because the snappiness of the autofocus makes it like if you are not tracking your subject like perfectly already in the focus point, it's gonna jump to the background because well you are now focused on the background in the focus point. So it's very like unforgiving for people that are learning, but in the same time I think um, it's a very good thing to learn to track the subject properly. Not always rely on your camera autofocus to track subjects because the more you do that, the less you're able to track subjects the day that you don't have any tracking. So I don't know. I think it's a skill to work on a little bit. And on the fast shooting capabilities, as I said, is just as laughable as the autofocus, in fact, but it's at maximum, like the CH is 8 frames per second, and the CL, so continuing high and now continuous low, CL is 5 frames per second. You can adjust that from 3 to 7. I wouldn't really move it from 5 because 3 is too slow for most things. 7, well, at this point, just shoot 8. And 5 is right in the middle and works well. So just shoot 5 and 8 or in single shots. And there is some reports about the D2H and the D2X, and I suspect Nikon to have engineered the shutter unit for 5 frames per second, and if they wanted it to do 8 frames per second last minute and pushed it beyond the mechanical capabilities of it, but there was instances where those shutters in D2H and D2X are destroying themselves if you are shooting too much at 8 frames per second. So I would shoot it like maybe a bit conservatively. I never had any issues. This one in particular has been used for photojournalism and stuff like that, so it has like 140K shutters on it, so it's not like it's not been used at all. But yeah, it's one thing that is pretty I would say concerning, but also not really. I don't know what is the probability of you destroying your camera if you shoot 8 frames per second too much, but hey, now you know. So, is it a good investment? I think that for the price it is, I paid mine $100, but keep in mind that it is heavily used, like all the grip tapes are gone. I'm going to put some more light on it. This is like cloth gaffer tape and not really grip tapes at all. But for the price I paid for it, I think the D2H, like for $100, pretty good investment. I went back on like used markets and stuff like that to see if there was other D2Hs or if I was just lucky, and Actually, no, I was just a little bit lucky in that sense because I never saw any other D2H at that price. I saw one for 130, and since I ended up buying another battery, and the one I saw at 130 was like sold with two batteries, I thought it was a good deal, and it was a way better shape than mine, with a way lower shutter count too. But that was the only one, and maybe that came from someone that didn't know any better. I don't know. The thing is, all the other D2Hs I saw were either 180 or 200 or above that, in which case I didn't even bother to check those out because I think that for this amount of money, it's a little bit too much. Like, keep in mind that a D2X that can still shoot at 8 frames per second with a crop, that has about the same noise level, about the same dynamic range, has 3 times the resolution. Well, keep in mind that this camera can be bought on MPB with warranty for about 230 bucks. So going 200 and above for D2H, I think it's a little bit of a stretch, and I think that if you have a budget of about 250, you should like wait a little bit and get something either like a D700 for 280, 300-ish, which with a grip and an ENEL4 in it will shoot 8 frames per second with a way better autofocus system, and it's full frame, better ISO performance in every way. Or you could just go get a D3, which is basically the same thing, just more rugged and in that form factor with an integrated battery grip. So there's that kind of thing. But there is also other options if we stay in the APS-C range, especially in the same generation as my D700 over there. So things like a D300, which is an APS-C camera that has the same autofocus system as this one. I don't know what sensor, I don't think it's the same as the D2X, but it's a 12 megapixel APS-C. I think it has way better noise performance though. But that camera can shoot 8 frames per second with a grip, with an ENEL4 inside, just like the D700. And it can have a way more accurate focus, and it's only about 130 bucks or something like that, all with having the same exact features that you expect from a professional body. So a D300 would be nice if you want more resolution, something like a D300S or a D7000. The D7000 is not as fast when it comes to shooting, but it has still tracking autofocus, and it costs a lot less. So that's some options. If you are not a Nikon shooter at all and you are considering a cheap camera to do sports and stuff like that, look at the Canon 7D. It's about the same price as D300, D300S, and still has 8 frames per second shooting and about the same resolution, about the same nose performance and stuff like that. So you have good options. Now, if you are really broke and you find a D2H for about $100, you can pair it with a lens like this. This is it going to focus on there? Yeah. Okay, so this is a DX 55-200 from Nikon. It is a cheapo plastic kit lens for telephotos, but on APS-C, it's an APS-C lens, so better be on APS-C, but it's about a 300mm equivalent at the long end. It has pretty good autofocus and it is stabilized, so you can get that one for 50 to 80 bucks, I think, and it's a pretty good optical performer. So if you put that and that thing, that whole camera setup, is under it's under 200 bucks. So that's actually pretty good setup if you don't want to ruin yourself, have a very good rugged camera body, and you want to shoot photojournalism or sports in daylight, because that lens is 5.6 at the long end. But as far as value, there is some value in the D2H, but I think that lens paired with any other camera I've mentioned, except the Canon one and the full frame ones, obviously, but any other camera that I mentioned would be a better pick, especially the D300. But yeah, it's a tough sell for the D2H. I'm not gonna lie. It's a tough camera to to say that really has value, and I don't think that for most people it makes sense. If you really want the weather sealing, if you really want the ruggedness, if you really want the battery that can last you all day, and you don't want to invest into any other accessories like a battery grip for a D300 or something like that, if you don't want to invest into either of those things, maybe the D2H is a better option. But as far as I'm concerned, you guys that want the D2H instead of the other options, you guys are in very small numbers, and for anybody else, maybe the D2H is not the better option. Okay, so that was the the perspective of someone that is getting that camera from a point of view of getting the most value for their money, using the camera as a tool to get images and to have a specific goal in mind and stuff like that. Now we're going to talk about the Digicam shooter, and this is where the perspective is going to shift entirely, because a Digicam shooter knows only two things. That's image rendition and color. And if those two things are good, whatever the fuck the camera is able to do on the side, or not able to do in the case of the D2H, is going to be a good one. Because character and flavor and everything that makes a camera special when it comes to the image quality are going to make the camera worth it, whatever if it's a 2 megapixel piece of crap from 1998, really. So there is a few things that a lot of Digicam shooters are accounted to, like especially the things that are, because those cameras are so old, you have some old weird batteries, some old weird camera formats, card formats, and if the camera is special and a bit of a unicorn, that's even better for those ones. So as a Digicam shooter myself, I can say that the D2H fits all the criteria I would want an old camera like this to fit. So if we look at the colors, I already said it, but the white balance sensor on top, I don't think it's that this is the thing that makes all the difference, but the colors out of this camera are super nice, and the skin tones are always on point, and when it comes to an artistic perspective, I think the D2H is actually a pretty good camera, and I've made images with this camera that I consider to be one of my best images, my best work, and the lack of resolution or dynamic range was insignificant piece of detail that I really didn't care about at all. So what is good about the D2H? Well, some of the advancement that the D2H made when it was released in 2003, if you compare it to the previous cameras, especially the D1 series and the Canon EOS 1D, those guys had very large NIMH batteries, which are not only discontinued, but really hard to get. If you get one, it might be not holding the charge properly. It does not have a lot of capacity, and on top of that, it's really long to charge. And the big improvement that the D2H made is that they went to lithium-ion batteries, and every flagship cameras from the D2H and forward used lithium-ion batteries. And Nikon kept the ENEL4 that they introduced with that camera with, well, the D3, the D2X that followed this model. They also use it in this battery grip for the D700 and the D300, where you can put an ENEL4 inside it, and this is what will make the camera shoot 8 frames per second, for example. So it's a very popular battery format that has been used on countless cameras. So even though Nikon is not making it anymore, third-party battery makers are going to make it. This is a 20 years old camera, folks. This is not common to be able to get a battery that old. A battery is brand new for a camera that old. So that is one thing. Also for the weird, media formats and stuff like that, well, we are using a good old CF card in here, and more than that, in this specific camera, I have a CF to SD adapter, and I'm using a cheap 4GB SD card like this one, and I'm using SD cards in my 20-year-old camera, and I absolutely don't care about it. So for cards and batteries, this camera is wonderful, and for glass it's even better because it's the f-mount. We have an APS-C sensor, so basically every lens that Nikon has ever made for the f-mount, we can put it on there. Maybe not the non-AI stuff from the 70s, but all the AI S glass from the 80s and forward, natively supported on that one. So that's pretty good. I think that's a very compelling package, and for not a lot of money. Now, the experimental stuff and a camera being a unicorn is also a thing that I know Digicam shooters like, and I like it. I really like the fact that this camera is the only camera in the world to have a JFET sensor. If you don't know what a JFET sensor is, it's basically a competitor to CMOS that was developed by Nikon from the late 90s to the early 2000s, and only Nikon made it. They put it in one camera, the D2H, and then they dropped it completely to put CMOS in the D2X. So they invested millions and millions on that technology only for it to flop miserably, and the reason it flopped is not really because JFET was not capable. It's just because Nikon played dumb and chose to use a smaller sensor size than Canon, and then wanted the smaller sensor to outperform the larger sensor when it comes to noise performance. The D2H was made to take down the EOS 1D that was released in 2001 that had a 4 megapixel APS-H sensor, which is considerably larger than the APS-C. So it was able to match it, and Nikon considered that as a win, but the user base did not consider that as a win at all. Like, they expected, like, the marketing of Nikon really played out this new JFET sensor to be something really important and really like groundbreaking, and it did not end up being groundbreaking at all. And even worse than that, Canon, that has been working on CMOS, came in and said, yeah, well, it's just CMOS, but ours are better. And so JFET was forgotten. So not only the JFET sensor was forgotten, but the D2H itself was forgotten. Everybody was getting D2X or a Canon flagship like a 1D Mark II or a 1DS. And the D2H, like, just seeing at the numbers of cameras that are on the used market, there is very little of them. And that means that it's a unicorn in the technology, and it's also a unicorn as a camera because there is very low numbers of them. So yeah, I think if we take all of that into account, I think it's actually a camera that is worth picking up. As a Digicam enthusiast, I consider to be, if I was dropping $150 for that camera, I wouldn't be mad actually. Actually, I think it's pretty worth it. Obviously, it's not having all the latest specs, but like, who cares? So here you go. Like, I thought that it was important to really give the D2H back what it deserves, because I mean, there is a lot of things about the D2H that I like. There is also a lot of things about the D2H that are impractical in the real world. But if you like the camera and the output, you don't care about those. So I also thought that it was kinda, hypocritical to go and give like a full positive review of the D2H, as it is obviously not a full positive camera. And it was important to do that, that side-by-side things, because I know, like, some of you commented it under the D700 video, like, thank you for sharing the good deals, and I don't want to be the guy that shares the good deals and the best cameras and stuff like that. I want to share the cameras that I like personally, and I want to be able to continue to do that, and I don't want to be recommending a camera, someone thinking, oh, if that guy recommends it, then that must be a good deal. And for most people that are not, like the Digicam enthusiasts and stuff like that, the D2H is actually not a good deal. So I wanted to do that video in that bit of special way, and to clear up any confusion on why I like that camera so much. Now that this video is made and pretty much finished, I'm gonna say thank you for watching. As always, I'm gonna leave you with a little gallery of my favorite photos that I took with it. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.